It was Christmas Eve, 1945. The war had just ended, and like many American families, the Sodders were ready to celebrate peace and homecoming. The Sodder house sat quietly on the edge of Fayetteville, West Virginia. It was a large two-story wood frame house, standing out in the dark countryside. George and Jenny Sodder lived here with their 10 children, a hard-working Italian-American family that believed in love, discipline, and tradition. That night, the Sodders decorated their home with string lights, wreaths, and candles. The children were full of excitement. They had been given permission to stay up later than usual, playing with toys, listening to Christmas music on the radio, and dreaming of what Santa might bring. George and Jenny eventually went to bed, taking the youngest, Sylvia, with them. 5 of the older children, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, stayed downstairs, laughing and playing around the Christmas tree. Outside, a storm was brewing. The wind howled through the hills. But inside, the Sodder home glowed with warmth and joy. No one knew it would be the last night the family would ever be whole again. At around 12:30 a.m., the phone rang unexpectedly. Jenny got up to answer it. A woman's voice asked for someone Jenny didn't know. In the background, she could hear laughter and clinking glasses, like a party. Jenny told her she had the wrong number and hung up. As she turned the light off, Jenny noticed something odd. The living room lights were still on, and the curtains were open. The children, who had promised to sleep by midnight, were nowhere in sight, but their toys were scattered on the floor. Assuming they had gone upstairs to bed, Jenny turned off the lights and returned to sleep. Just a few hours later, their world would be reduced to ashes and an unending mystery. It was just after 1 a.m. when Jenny awoke again. She heard something, a loud thud, followed by a strange scraping sound on the roof. She froze. Then silence. A few minutes later, the smell hit her. Smoke. Thick. Sharp. Burning. Jenny shook George awake and ran out of the room. The hallway was already filling with gray smoke. Flames licked the walls near the staircase. The office, where George kept his phone line and fuse box, was in flames. They screamed for the children. Jenny, George, and 4 of the kids, Sylvia, 2, Marion, 17, John, 23, and George Jr., 16, managed to escape. But the 5 younger children who had stayed up late, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were trapped inside. The stairs were on fire. The phone was dead. Smoke filled the air. George tried to re-enter the house, but the heat was unbearable. He broke a window, slicing his arm open. He screamed their names, running around the house in a panic. He climbed the side wall. He tried to use a ladder, but the ladder was missing from its usual spot. He tried to drive his coal trucks close to the window and climb, but neither truck would start, even though they had worked perfectly that day. Someone even tried to fetch water from the nearby barrel, but the water was frozen solid. In just 45 minutes, the house was reduced to a smoking pile of ash and collapsed timber. By sunrise, 5 of the Sodder children were gone. The fire department, delayed by poor communication and understaffing, didn't arrive until 8 a.m. By then, it was far too late. But even in the rubble, no remains were found. No bones, no teeth, nothing. The official answer? They burned. But Jenny knew better. When the firemen finally arrived at the scene, the house was still smoldering. Chief F.J. Morris was a local man. He knew the Sodder family well. But his explanation made Jenny and George feel uneasy. He said it was too hot to find bones. He said the bodies had completely disintegrated. But Jenny didn't believe it. She had read stories about house fires before. She even tested this herself, burning animal bones in the stove. Even after hours, bones were still left behind. How could 5 healthy children vanish without a trace? The firefighters found no remains, no human ash, no skulls, nothing. Jenny began to suspect something was wrong, very wrong. More strange things began to surface. A phone repairman later said that the phone line hadn't burned. It was cut before the fire started. A witness claimed to have seen a man stealing the family ladder hours before the fire. Another neighbor said they saw a car parked along the road, watching the Sodder house, just days before. Jenny started having nightmares. She'd wake up screaming the children's names. George became obsessed. He swore he'd find out what happened or die trying. Then they got a knock at the door. It was a man from the fire department. He pulled George aside. He told him something that would haunt him forever. "We don't think they burned. We think they were taken." George stared in disbelief. "Taken?" The man nodded, slowly. Thus began a search that would last decades. As the ashes cooled, questions began to burn hotter than the fire itself. How could a fire that burned for less than an hour completely destroy 5 human bodies, yet leave appliances, parts of the metal roof, and even some household items behind? Jenny couldn't understand. She had read articles about house fires. She knew that even in crematoriums, which burn at far higher temperatures for hours, bones always remained. She began to experiment. She burned chicken bones, pork bones, even a full cow bone in the fireplace. Every time, the bones remained. Why didn't her children's? George also had questions. Why didn't the fire spread faster if it was electrical, as officials claimed? He had rewired the house recently, and even the Christmas lights stayed on for part of the fire. How was that possible? And then, the trucks, his coal delivery vehicles. Both had worked the day before. But during the fire, neither would start. Later, a mechanic would say both had been tampered with. Then came the biggest question of all. Where were the children? Not a single tooth, bone fragment, or piece of cloth was found in the ash. Not even a button from their pajamas. And yet, the family's household coins, the stove, and even parts of the piano were found. Jenny and George now believed something terrible. The children had been taken before the fire, and the fire was just a distraction to cover the crime. In the weeks that followed, strange clues began to appear. A bus driver claimed he had seen balls of fire being thrown onto the roof the night of the fire. George later found a small, hard object in the grass, like a pineapple-shaped explosive, possibly a napalm or incendiary device used in war. Jenny remembered the loud thud she heard that night, followed by scratching on the roof. Could it have been someone throwing that device to start the fire? Another woman, who lived nearby, said she had seen the missing children inside a passing car during the fire. She had no reason to lie, and she didn't even know the Sodders. Even more chilling, a woman working at a hotel in Charleston, about 50 miles away, reported that she saw 4 of the Sodder children a few weeks later. She said they arrived with 2 adults, men who acted very cold and controlling. She remembered one of the children had a picture of herself and tried to hide it when others got close. Jenny and George began to believe their worst fear. The children were alive, but kidnapped. They began putting up billboards, writing letters to newspapers, and offering a $10,000 reward, a huge amount back then, for any information. One night, someone knocked on their door and whispered, "Your children didn't die, but you'll never see them again," and vanished into the darkness. Years passed, but the mystery refused to die. In 1954, almost a decade later, the Sodders received a strange phone call. Jenny picked up. The voice on the line was deep and quiet. He asked, "Is George Sodder there?" Jenny said yes. But then, silence. A few seconds later, she heard laughter, and then the click of the line going dead. This wasn't the only time it happened. For years, strange calls kept coming, sometimes late at night. The voice was different each time, but always calm, emotionless, sometimes whispering the children's names. Then, in 1968, 23 years after the fire, the Sodders received something even more disturbing. A letter arrived in the mail. It had no return address, postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a young man, around 30, standing against a wall. On the back was scribbled, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Illo boys. A 90132 or 35. Louis was one of the 5 children believed to have died in the fire. George and Jenny stared at the photo. The man had Louis's exact facial features, the same dark eyes, nose shape, even a familiar tilt in the head. They were stunned. Could Louis be alive? The photo became their obsession. They hung it above the fireplace. George even drove to Kentucky, searching towns and records, but found nothing. Was it a cruel prank? Or had someone tried to send a message that their son had survived and wanted them to know? They would never find out. As the years went by, the Sodder case turned from a local mystery into a national obsession. Newspapers across the country began running the story. Radio shows discussed it. Journalists came to Fayetteville from distant cities to interview the grieving parents. Many people, including strangers, donated money to help the Sodders continue their investigation. The family had now built a large billboard right beside Route 16, with huge photos of the 5 missing children and the words, "What was their fate? Kidnapped? Murdered?" The truth must be told. It wasn't just a plea, it was a challenge to the authorities. As cars passed the sign daily, tourists stopped to take pictures. Some cried, others felt spooked. Many asked, how can 5 children disappear without a trace? Over time, the billboard became a symbol of 2 things: hope, that maybe the truth would come out, and pain, that it hadn't yet. Even as they aged, George and Ginny refused to stop. They hired private detectives, interviewed former neighbors, and chased rumors across multiple states. One detective claimed the children had been taken to Italy by distant relatives. Another suggested they had been sold to an orphanage or secret organization. Most leads led nowhere, or worse, ended in fear. One private investigator wrote to them anonymously, "You're being watched. Let it go." But the Sodders refused. They had no proof the children were dead, and until they did, they would believe they were alive. With no clear answers, theories flooded in, some believable, others terrifying. Theory 1. The Mafia Connection. George Sodder had strong opinions. He openly criticized Benito Mussolini, the former fascist dictator of Italy. In a close-knit Italian immigrant community, this made enemies. Some believed George was targeted by pro-Mussolini supporters, possibly connected to the Italian mafia. Maybe the fire was a warning or punishment. Maybe the children were taken by force or held to silence the family. But if that were true, why let George and Ginny live? Theory 2. Child trafficking. Some experts suggested the children had been abducted as part of a black market adoption ring or trafficking network. This theory explained why the children were seen with strange adults later on in hotels, across towns, always in hiding. Theory 3. Government involvement. Others believed the truth was darker. After World War II, America was a hotbed of spy networks, political enemies, and secret operations. Could the children have been taken by mistake or on purpose as part of something larger? Why didn't the FBI investigate further? Why did records go missing over time? Why did so many leads get blocked or ignored? Even decades later, some believe the government knew more than they ever shared. Theory 4. The children survived and hid. This was perhaps the hardest to accept, that the children had somehow survived but had been brainwashed or forced to forget. One theory suggested the children had been separated, given new names, and raised as someone else's kids. It sounded like fiction, but after everything else, the Sodders couldn't rule it out. At first, George begged the FBI to help. He wrote to J. Edgar Hoover, the agency's powerful director. Surprisingly, Hoover replied. He wrote, "Although I would like to assist, the case appears to be a local matter and not under FBI jurisdiction." Still, Hoover offered help if local authorities requested it. But the local sheriff refused. He claimed there was no crime, only a tragic fire. He believed the children had died in the flames and told the Sodders to move on. The FBI closed the case. That decision crushed the family. They couldn't understand. How could 5 missing children, potentially abducted, not be a federal case? Years later, the family tried again, submitting new evidence and theories. The FBI never reopened the file. Even stranger, when the family requested documents, they found that some reports had disappeared, especially from the earliest days. Witness statements, firefighter notes, even photos gone. Some believed the sheriff had something to hide. Others thought he was simply in over his head, not realizing how big the case truly was. But the fact remained. The most powerful law enforcement agency in the world refused to investigate the disappearance of 5 American children. Why? The Sodders never got an answer. They began to believe something was being covered up. And the longer the silence lasted, the more people started to believe them. George and Ginny Sodder refused to give up. For decades, they chased every lead. They traveled across states, hired private investigators, interviewed strangers, and studied maps. George carried a briefcase of clues everywhere he went. Photographs, letters, news articles, like a mobile shrine to his missing children. The family built a second billboard, this time even larger, right by a major highway. It became famous, a haunting image of 5 smiling children beneath the words, "Still missing." People came from all over the country to see it. Some brought tips, others just cried. Some prayed. Ginny wore black mourning clothes every day for the rest of her life, as if she were attending a funeral that had never taken place. Their surviving children helped when they could, but the family began to split into 2 groups. Those who believed the children were dead, and those who still hoped for a miracle. The search cost the family nearly everything: their money, their peace, their privacy, even their health. But they never stopped, until death made them. In 1969, George Sodder passed away. He died in his sleep, holding the photo believed to be Louis, the one that arrived by mail decades after the fire. He had stared at it every night for years. His last words to his wife were soft. "We were close, Jenny. I know it." Jenny lived another 20 years. She never remarried. She stayed in the same house, surrounded by memories and the large black dress she wore daily. In 1989, Jenny passed away quietly in her bed. Her funeral was small. Her children wept, not only for their mother, but for the 5 siblings they never saw again. After her death, the famous Sodder Billboard was finally taken down. It had stood for nearly 40 years, a symbol of heartbreak and unresolved truth. But the message didn't die. The mystery had already passed into legend. Even after George and Jenny were gone, one clue continued to haunt the family. The photo of Louis. Who sent it? Was it real? Or a cruel trick? Some investigators believe the handwriting on the back was coded, a strange mix of letters and numbers. Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Illo boys. A 90132 or 35. No one ever cracked the code. But some believed it was a hidden message, possibly sent by one of the children themselves. Years later, digital experts scanned the photo. Some said it was heavily altered. Others believed it matched Louis perfectly, from bone structure to eyebrow shape. One theory said the photo wasn't recent, it had been taken years earlier, and only sent later to confuse the timeline. But nothing was confirmed. The photo was kept in the family for decades, passed from hand to hand, a mystery within the mystery. It was their only link to a face that had once smiled under the Christmas tree, before vanishing forever. In the 2000s, new technology brought new hope. DNA testing, facial recognition, and digital forensics allowed a new generation to re-examine the Sodder case. Modern researchers compared the mysterious photo with known images of Louis, using AI to estimate facial aging and bone structure. The match was not perfect, but close enough to raise questions. Investigators also searched graveyards, adoption records, and medical histories across the U.S. Some family members submitted DNA samples, hoping to find long-lost siblings through genealogy databases. No matches ever surfaced. Online forums grew, filled with theories, documents, maps, and timelines. True crime podcasts began to explore the case. People from all over the world got involved, some out of curiosity, others out of obsession. Still, even with modern tools, the case remained unsolved. It became a haunting example of how even in the age of technology, some secrets stay buried. It's been nearly 80 years since that Christmas Eve in 1945. The Sodder home is long gone. The billboard is gone. Most of the family has passed away. But the story remains. A story of 5 children, gone without a trace. Of a fire that erased a family's joy, but not their questions. Of a mother who wore black until her last breath. Of a father who believed, even in his final moments, that his children were out there somewhere. Was it an accident? A kidnapping? A cover-up? No one knows for sure. The only truth that remains is this. Something happened that night, and no one ever told the full story. Maybe the children survived. Maybe they died. Maybe they were taken for reasons we'll never understand. But one thing is certain. The Sodder family never gave up. And because of that, the world never forgot.